Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. In the third installment of our grunge history series, we reached the year 1989. Grunge is still an underground thing, but the word about the Seattle movement is certainly spreading and starting to penetrate people's consciousness. Soundgarden, one of the original 3 grunge bands, signed to a major label, A&M Records, and released their second album. Mudhoney, meanwhile, were tapped as the Seattle scene's breakout stars-to-be on the backs of their amazing EP and singles from the previous year. They released their full-length debut album in 1989. From the ashes of Green River and Malfunction rose Mother Love Bone, a band that infused grunge with a definitive glam rock glitter thanks to their flamboyant frontman, Andrew Wood. Screaming Trees' update on 1960s garage rock and soul, put through a grunge filter, got even stronger with their best album to date. And Tad's pummeling industrial-grade metal put them alongside the Melvins on the super heavy side of grunge. And of course, a little band from Aberdeen, Washington with a little blonde guy named Kurt released their debut album on Sub Pop Records, the first shot from a band that would eventually change the whole game. While still an underground movement in the US, grunge started to get mainstream music media coverage thanks to Everett True, a writer from one of the legendary British weekly magazines, Melody Maker, who flew to Seattle and wrote the very first expose on the whole grunge movement. Bands that weren't from Seattle but were grunge-adjacent were also making some noise. After the demise of Austin, Texas's Scratch Acid, lead singer David Yao moved to Chicago and formed the Jesus Lizard, a band whose abrasive, confrontational sound put them in the grunge ballpark without exactly being grunge, while also proving rather influential. And speaking of influential, even more so were the Pixies from Boston. Their timeless classic Surfer Rosa from the previous year provided a template for a new kind of aggressive yet artful rock and roll that would become a stylistic talisman for countless bands in the 1990s and beyond. In '89, though, their album Doolittle cemented them as the biggest band in U.S. college radio. So, let's dive once again into those grungy waters and examine the last year of the decade that spawned this unruly beast. Welcome to part 3 of the Saga of Grunge, and welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
All right, Arturo, you ready to talk about early grunge? This should be good. A lot of good albums.
1989 was a strong year, and we're a couple of years away from the big watershed moment, but things are building up toward that in this series. We're getting there. There.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be talking about lots of good music. Speaking of talking about good music, before we talk about the old music, we got to talk about the new music. And by talking about the new music, I mean we're crossing over into our parallel universe. Over on this side of the space-time continuum, rock and roll is still predominant, and it's still the thing, man. It's what fills the stadiums. It's what captures the zeitgeist. The imaginations are captured via V-neck guitars, and then sometimes 2 turntables and a microphone too. But people still care about there's communal experience with music. That isn't Taylor Swift, Beyonce, or Olivia Rodrigo, or Bad Bunny. And so, it goes deeper into the rock and roll still in the parallel universe. A fancy way of saying that this is the segment. We always kick off our shows with this segment where we talk about new and newish artists that we think that you would enjoy or that you should check out or that we've been vibing on for the past few weeks. And so with that said, who are you covering on this episode's edition of the Parallel Universe, dude?
Yes, in 2024, the Brighton-based British indie rock band Limegarden released their debut album, One More Thing. A scintillating mix of trad, indie rock, disco, and pop. The majority of that scintillation came in the record's first half, which is where all the great singles were. The second half sounded half-baked and underdeveloped, as if the band was still searching to define themselves outside of those 3 killer tracks. 2 years later, they've come back with their second album, Maybe Not Tonight, and it's a much, much better record. The music sounds fuller and richer, the arrangements weave into each other more fluidly, and the songs are catchier, punchier, and much more solidly constructed. One other thing that sticks out about this album is the overall tempo, which is relentlessly upbeat and funky, with not one track sounding like the other. Lead singer Chloe Howard still ruminates on her self-esteem issues, but she also starts to bite back on the society that birthed her. Her sarcasm toward toxically masculine ego drips with attitude on the delectable indie disco of all bad parts. Lots of references to mid to late noughties rock abound on this album. The song Maybe Not Tonight, as well as Body, bring to mind early Block Party. The second single released from this record, 23, sounds like the sleek dance rock of peak LCD sound system. They even reach back to a bit of 1990s Britpop with Downtown Lover, which could easily have come off of Blur's 1997 self-titled album, with Leela Dealey's guitar even approaching those of those Graham Coxon-esque skronky guitar tones and lead lines. It's the best indie rock / indie pop album to come out this year so far, and it's easily in my top 10 of the year so far. A very good 4 out of 5 stars. Chris?
I really like this album too. Britpop lives.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, there's a strong whiff of Elastica and Blur that run through this record. I mean, this is legitimately edgy dance rock. I mean, it just has an edginess to it, and it's catchy, but it's edgy too. And so it's just really engaging stuff. And Chloe Howard is just as cheeky and just as brassy and just as observant as Damon Albarn, lead singer of Blur. And 23, which is the lead song on the record and one of the singles, is the best rock song I've heard so far this year. I guess real song. Non-Angine de Poitrine division. But so just really, really strong stuff. And like you said, way better. Yeah, I didn't like that debut record. I thought it was half baked and kind of derivative, but they really found themselves here. And they're they formed in college, so they're basically a college boy band. And, so there is a lot of smart stuff.
Or college girl band, you should say.
Yeah. College girl and boys. Yeah. And just a lot of smart stuff going on here. So, I don't know if it'll make my top 10. Who knows? But this year it's accelerating. It got off to a slow start as far as albums, but in the last month and a half, there've been several strong albums that may end up contending for top of list honors by December. So we'll see. And so we segue now. We're going back a year. We're going back into 2025, and we're going to be talking about one of the most magnificently strange and fascinatingly messy albums I think I've ever heard. And really strong, and so strong actually, Pitchfork. Say what you want about Pitchfork. They're very polarizing, but they do take some risks and do some chancy things. And last year, they had this album as their number one album of 2025, which is strange because it was only released. It was only kind of like Cindy Lee the year before, which was their number one in 2024. It was released as a YouTube upload and never got a formal release through streaming or through a label. So we're talking about this duo, this sibling duo that goes by Los Thuthanaka. And this is their self-titled record, Los Thuthanaka, which was released in April of 2025. So let's talk about Los Thuthanaka and why I find it so engaging. The self-titled debut album from Latin avant-garde supergroup Los Thuthanaka is a fascinating mess. It's a relentless sonic assault. At times, it's at risk of letting its noisiness overwhelm the proceedings, but it's also strangely magnificent and magnificently strange and utterly absorbent. It's one of those albums that grows more poignant and even spectacular the more you listen to it. Ultimately, it's one of the most adventurous albums I think I've ever heard. Yet I don't go as far with my praise as Pitchfork did last year. Like I said, Pitchfork had this as their number one album of the year. I do credit Pitchfork for turning me onto this album, though. I mean, it piqued my curiosity. Like, what is this weird, self-released, exotic-sounding name album? So how to describe this Los Thuthanaka album? Firstly, it's a product of the shared ancestry and experimental leanings of siblings Joshua and Alicia Crampton. The Cramptons are Bolivian Americans from California who've individually enjoyed success in the Latin underground for more than a decade. Alicia Crampton is an EDM artist, noise collagist, and percussionist who performs under the stage name Chucky Mamani Kandori. They're also a non-binary woman who has my respect and will get their proper pronouns from here. Joshua Crampton is a guitarist whose specialty is crunchy, spacey, and hypnotic soundscapes and compositions. Both Cramptons have explored rhythms and musical styles native to the Andean terrain of their parents' home region. Check out Chucky Mamani Kandori's 2023 album DJE and Joshua Crampton's 2024 album Estrella por Estrella for fine examples of each sibling's recent solo work. Yet together here as Los Thuthanaka, the Cramptons challenge each other to reach new heights. This 1 hour long, 8-song cycle finds them specifically honoring their indigenous Aymara heritage and several musical forms associated with the Andes and that specific subculture. These aggressive yet danceable forms include Hoyano, Caporal, Kulawanda, Parandita, and Soleil. The siblings take these forms and squeeze every ounce of energy from them, creating songs that thrive on repetition and grow increasingly more intense and rocked out as they proceed. The album hovers somewhere between trance house and trance rock as a result. These compositions cleverly evoke other genres as well. The two main ancillary influences that I hear are Southern screwed and chopped hip-hop, with its emphasis on psychedelic but beautiful guitar and keyboard lead lines and weird clip vocal samples, and late 1980s Japanese video game music. Seriously, there is some gnarly final boss shit on here. These references do not trivialize the artistry here, though. On this album, the Cramptons meditate on their culture and also the struggle to maintain their identity and acknowledge the centuries-long impact of colonialism on the Aymara people. For Chucky Mamani Kandori, personally, there also is a meditation on the tumultuous nature of discovering gender identity. The English name of the astonishing sixth song on this album gives that away, Queer Grandma. While the duo threaten to achieve transcendence throughout the album, it isn't until we reach Queer Grandma and its more untethered follow-up, Tunapa the Walker, that they actually do transcend the proceedings. The 11-minute Queer Grandma aggressively pours on loud drum machines and electric piano notes that pull off the neat trick of forming a hypnotic sonic thundercloud that becomes a canopy from which Joshua Crampton's metal-inspired guitar shredding and moody synths rain down on us. They relent at the very end with grieving piano notes and a gentle wave of electronic noise. That all then segues us into Tunapa the Walker, a drumless but nevertheless unsettling soundscape that mournfully reflects on legacy and loss. The mix of rumbling vocal samples, crashing synth warbles, gorgeous keyboards, and what sounds to me like psychedelic bagpipe samples that comprise it are truly stunning. And in an odd way, Tune-Up feels like a prayerful submission and spiritual departure in an otherwise rhythmic powerhouse. It shouldn't work, but it does. Other standout songs here include back-to-back Joshua Crampton Star Vehicles, the propulsive fuzzed-out Jalala Ailu Pahaza Marka Kutu Pakasa, say that 10 times fast, and the sort of funky blast-off rocker Dumb Evil. While I admire Los Thuthanaka quite a lot, two things unfortunately prevent it from being a classic. First, the Cramptons decided to forego a final mix and mastering job. This is meant as an artistic statement tied to an Imera philosophy on the nature of time and existence. The past, present, and future are all now, and creation is never tangible as a result. But that decision robs the album of sonic balance and clarity. At times, the untamed noisiness threatens to overwhelm the songs, and the wildness distracts from the artistry to the point where several listens become mandatory to actually get what they're doing here. Second, Alicia Crampton insists on plastering their songs with incessant, annoying DJ tags that juxtapose badly against the tremendous music here. They're telling us that they're a DJ first and a musician second. They're way too talented to get caught up in that kind of competitive identity bullshit. And so we end up with a 4.5-star album that continues to grow on me and obsess me even after 10 full listens in spite of these annoyances. In my revisited top 10 albums for 2025, Los Thuthanaka rests comfortably at number 5. While Pitchfork's number 1 decree counts as overpraise, I'm definitely thankful for their brassiness in turning the world onto this record. Thanks, homeboys. Arturo, what say you?
Yeah, I have it at number 6 in my revised of a top 10 of 2025. This album really grew on me too. I think it's really good. For me, well, before I go to my criticism of it, my praise of it consists of the fact my description of this was basically the very first thing I said when I heard it applies now. It's basically 1980s up until early 1990s video game music. If video games were produced in Latin America, yep, and not the United States and in parts of Asia. But that's not a criticism, because this music is really hypnotic and it's really trancy. And what I like about it is the rhythmic element of it, which is very much based on the indigenous folk music of the Aymara people in the Andes Mountains. For those people who don't know, the Aymara are mostly in Bolivia, a little bit in Peru, and they're all along the Andes Mountains. And that's the culture where the siblings in Los Thuthanaka are descended from. They themselves were born and raised in the Los Angeles area, in Riverside to be exact. And so I really do dig this music a lot. I love the rhythmic element. Yeah, the mastering a bit, the lack of mastering, I can see why it could bother you and some other people. And but I kind of like the fact that it's not mastered properly. I think it adds to the subterranean ethos of that this album emits, which I really dig. I'm not big on track 7. I'm not even going to bother pronouncing it. I mean, Parrandita sounds Spanish, but I'm not even going to go on what the rest of it is. Parrandita Sariri Tunupa. For me, that track 7, it's a little too ethereal. It's a little too long. It doesn't fit the musical motif of the record. I think it works better. It would have worked better as like a 2-minute segue for the next track instead of a continuation from the previous track. But that's small nitpicking. I give it an overall 4 out of 5 stars. It's really great. It's really inventive. It's really original. There's nothing else like it that came out last year or this year for that matter. Yeah. And there's some YouTube clips. You can find them of them, the two of them performing live. And it sounds a little different live. Live actually sounds clearer. The clarity is way out there, way up front when they perform this stuff live. Yeah. And that's the part of like you said, the mastering is it's got its pluses and minuses. Like I said, the lack of mastering, you do get, like you said, you get that subterranean, you get that sort of, you get that rough hewness, which gives it some of its power. I'll give it that. But like you said, it's that clarity that is really kind of missing, because there's other than the DJ tags. There's other vocal sampling and other rumblings going on underneath the mix that, it takes
a while to seize onto and to discover.
Yeah.
And, once you discover those, it's like, okay, well, if I had heard that first, I would have thought this is one of the best things ever. Why did I have to listen to this 6 times to find it? And so, so that, I guess look, the people that absolutely adore Steely Dan's Aja probably won't like this record, or they won't want to understand it. But yeah, I really do think that it's thrilling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the Andean touches, and it is kind of strange that with some of the rhythms, and Joshua Crampton's a hell of a guitar player, by the way. That kid kicks ass. But it is kind of fascinating how much crossover there is between those, like Huayano. I'm totally not pronouncing that right. Huayano I believe is how you pronounce it.
Huayno. Huayno. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I speak Spanish, so I can kind of pronounce most of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, for you might as well stick to calling them tracks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, but there's 2 of these Huayno pieces on it, and it is kind of amazing how final bosses they are.
Yeah.
Like, especially song 3, Dumb Evil. That's like total. I see the final boss is a gorilla in a suit of armor that you need to beat in like a jungle motif.
Yeah.
As I said, it is very evocative video game music. And then the screwed and chop thing is very, very clever. And and that's the combination of those kind of those warped but beautiful lead lines, and also the clipped vocal samples that Alicia uses. So it's, again, this is exciting music. I'm going to be vibing on this for quite a while. And it's kind of funny. Go to their YouTube site, and here's a pro tip for y'all. It's available on YouTube, so you just do a search for Los Thuthanaka, and if you look in our episode description, the spelling will be there. But what you do is you copy the URL to the album upload on YouTube. Go to Google, type in YouTube Converter. A site will come up where you can go on to. You paste in that URL, and you can get an audio only file of the album, and so that way you don't have to suffer through fucking commercials. Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
So, the British come to Seattle. That's the story of 1989. It's really difficult to explain to younger generation music fans, and even just American music fans in general, how important weekly music magazines were in the UK during the time of physical media. They were the lifeblood of music promotion in the British music industry, and until the early 2000s, their reviews could make or break bands and artists. Unlike the US, Canada, or Australia, the notion of quote-unquote widespread circulation isn't that widespread in the UK, which is rather geographically small. All the magazines were based in London, and rave reviews of a band's album and shows 1 week meant that their album can chart highly on the UK album charts the next week, their single can hit the top 40 of the UK pop chart the next, and they can play sellout shows as far north as Scotland the next week. Melody Maker and the New Musical Express, the latter of which is still around, were the two major players, but there were others such as Sounds and Disc. And these magazines were incredibly competitive, with each publication employing excellent writers and all of them on the lookout for, quote unquote, the next big thing. Of course, such competition and such seeking of great up-and-coming acts meant that there would be the occasional, if not common, hyperbolizing of the merits of new bands and artists. But overall, especially if you loved reading music media, the British weekly magazines were a fountain of information, actually. Fountain of information, knowledge, and a forecast of what was to come regarding up-and-coming bands. In 1989, the British music weeklies were still prominent for music fans, and one particular writer for Melody Maker, Everett True, was enamored with Mudhoney's early singles and their EP from the previous year. Upon finding out about Soundgarden and the Sub Pop record label, he sniffed out that there was an original and interesting music scene in Seattle. It's a testament to how well these weekly magazines did and how much money they actually made that True convinced his editor to pay for a round-trip plus hotel costs ticket, a round-trip ticket plus hotel costs, to spend a few weeks in Seattle and come back with a story. What True came back with was the first major article on the Seattle grunge scene and grunge music in general by a mainstream music publication. Yes, the British beat the Americans to it as far as coverage was concerned. And who was covered in this article? And who was it? Seriously, who was that was published in March 1989? Well, Mudhoney got a huge write-up, as did Soundgarden, who had just signed to a major label at the time. Also written about was a fledgling band called Nirvana, who hadn't even released their debut album yet. For an unknown band like them at the time, this kind of press coverage, even if it was from another country, was immeasurable. Also covered were the Go Team, who didn't really go anywhere, yuck, and L7, who are actually from Los Angeles, but whose sound was so grungy, they may as well have been from Seattle. The real stars of the article, however, is the entire Sub Pop record label itself. Jonathan Poneman and Bruce Pavitt got the best press imaginable, as they were portrayed as indie rock savants. Sub Pop in general was written about as the leaders of a powerful new movement. To effect, Sub Pop had taken over from SST as America's hippest, coolest indie record label. True accurately assessed them as a small indie label that thought big, especially when it came to clever self-promotion, marketing, and conspicuous branding. True even included a guide to the entire Sub Pop roster at the time in his article. The importance of the article was twofold. First, it marked the emergence of grunge as a vital new subgenre of rock, one that merged heavy metal grandiosity with punk energy and attitude, unpretentious yet artsy, authentically underground yet brimming with commercial appeal. Second, it alerted the American music industry to what was going on in Seattle. Soundgarden had already been snapped up by A&M Records, and now, via the exposure from a well-known British music magazine, major record labels knew there were more bands where Soundgarden came from. The aftermath of the article's publication marks the point where major labels started going into Seattle to sign bands. Soon after, Alice in Chains would sign with Columbia Records. Mother Love Bone was on an indie label distributed by Mercury Records. Nirvana would eventually become the focus of a major bidding war, a sign that, yes, the gatekeepers did indeed hear something that the world would eventually love, and they would indeed sign Nirvana, with Geffen Records. Seattle was in the beginning stages of being a major part of the musical map, and the reverberations would start to be felt in major ways in short time. Chris?
Yep, gotta love the British press. And here, my comment on this is Sonic Youth plays a very important role in the development, in getting grunge on the radar.
Yeah, they got Mudhoney to open for them.
Yeah,
that was a
steering and guiding. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So basically, they caught on to Mudhoney in early 1988 and were so enamored with that band that Sonic Youth invited Mudhoney to open up for them when they toured the UK. And this was, I think, either right before or right after they released Daydream Nation that they went over there. And Mudhoney caught fire. They basically were in and out of the charts over there for a year.
Yeah.
Superfuzz Big Muff played really well. The debut album there did really well, and that's where Sub Pop got its initial infusion of cash to be able to do anything as far as have the ambition to release LPs and more EPs and sign more artists and all of that. And so the Mudhoney windfall kind of helped fund that. But yeah, so Sonic Youth inviting Mudhoney over to Britain puts Mudhoney on a big map, and catches the eye of Everett True, who then is like, okay, let's see what this is about, and piqued his curiosity, flew him over to Seattle. They get the big exposure, and then the majors start converging on it once they realize, hey, there's something there. And so again, Sonic Youth, they become important a year and a half later when Nirvana opened for Sonic Youth for a stretch in America. And at that point, I believe Sonic Youth was also on DGC. It was Geffen. It was Geffen, but DGC was the sub imprint where the rock bands were, or the alt rock bands were. And so it was I think it was Sonic Youth that kind of put Nirvana on the radar of Danny Goldberg, who was the A&R guy at DGC, and kind of got Nirvana going with the majors. And so, yeah, Sonic Youth is kind of like a 6 degrees of separation band in the story of grunge.
Sure. That is why they're grunge adjacent.
Yeah, very grunge adjacent. Yeah.
All right, so let's get into the key grunge albums and EPs of this year, 1989. Let's start off with Mudhoney and their self-titled debut album. In later years, lead singer and guitarist Mark Arm would talk about how Mudhoney were rushed by Sub Pop to make a full-length album and capitalize on the heavy buzz and hype generated by their singles and the Superfuzz Big Muff EP from the previous year. And the album certainly sounds like it, as this is your classic 50-50 record. Half of the songs sound half-baked and underdeveloped, yet the other half has some of the best songs of this band's career. Has there ever been a greater anthem for disaffection and disillusionment that rocks serious balls than Flat Out Fucked? Here Comes Sickness was the single from this album and is one of Mudhoney's most beloved songs. By today's standards, some people would call this song misogynistic. However, if you think about it, the song's lyrical content, shallow, vapid women who overuse sexuality and promiscuity to define themselves, is a motif many female singer-songwriters have tackled throughout the years, and some with the same vitriol Arm uses. Yep. Factor in other bangers like Get Into Yours, The Farther I Go, and When Tomorrow Hits, and you get an album that really should have been another kick-ass EP. Chris?
Yeah, probably would have been better off as an EP, but as it was the LP, and it was one of the first. I don't know if it was the first, but it was one of the first full lengths that Sub Pop released. Right. And and like you said, Sub Pop was looking to capitalize on the buzz, but they proved that it was worth it. And Mudhoney is an interesting story. They were supposed to be the superstar grunge export.
Yeah.
They were the ones that were supposed to be the stars that were going to make Seattle big, and that they were going to be the superstars. And in some ways it made sense because you had that edge to them. They had a tremendous punk metal hybrid aesthetic. You had Steve Turner, who was one of the 3 or 4 best guitarists in all of the Pacific Northwest, just an incredible guitar player. And then you had Arm, who was a shtickmeister extraordinaire. He was kind of like a court jester type, which kind of was part of his problem, or part of why they didn't get bigger. It turned out that they had a low ceiling. They had a high floor, but they had a low ceiling. Yeah. But still, tremendous energy, super fun. Like you said, Flat Out Fucked is just amazing. Yeah. Here Comes Sickness is amazing. And, just really just great, jagged, in that sweet spot between punk and metal, like we said, that was kind of the gestation of grunge back in like 1985 and 1986. So, yeah, and nobody embodied the spirit of grunge better than they did.
Right.
Which is us against the world. We don't give a fuck. Loud, abrasive, obnoxious, and gleeful about it, and those types of things. It wasn't dark and depressed. It was loud and boisterous, and so yeah, long live Mudhoney. Great band, and yeah, again, kind of a what could have been. I just don't think that they were made for general mainstream public consumption.
No, they weren't.
Ultimately,
Yeah. Yeah. But hey, they were still great, and they're still around.
yep, yeah, they
right.
are.
Next, Soundgarden with Louder Than Love. Early Soundgarden, late 1980s Soundgarden, they were characterized by their highly original, brooding, haunting sound that blended the heavy riff rock of peak 1970s Zeppelin and Sabbath with the energy and intensity of punk and the atmosphere of post-punk. The problem was the inconsistency in songwriting, and that continues with their second full-length album and their first for a major label, A&M Records. Yet the good stuff is peak grunge and some of the best songs of the era. Lead single Hands All Over is one of Kim Thayil's most audacious riffs, and Chris Cornell's lament for what humanity does to the environment is one of the best rock songs ever written about Mother Nature. Gun is just pure sludge majesty, while Get on the Snake, despite its dumbass lyrics, is an arena-ready groove monster. The sound is there, the songs aren't all quite there, but they're getting there, and the table is being set for the masterpiece that will come a couple of years later. Chris?
Yeah, the sound is magnificent. I mean, this is a tremendously produced record. They worked with a guy named Terry Date, who also ended up producing Bad Motorfinger a couple of years later. But yeah, you're right. The thing with early Soundgarden is they had the aesthetic, and they had the heaviness, and they had the exoticism way before they had the songs.
Yeah.
And this album is where Cornell becomes the primary songwriter. He writes 7 of the songs.
Yeah.
And, Loud Love is the best of those. That's a great song. But there's but most of it is dopey and shticky. I mean, Big Dumb Sex is a funny song, and it's a fun little groover, but it's dope.
According to Cornell, that song was meant to be a spoof, satire of like the LA hair metal and glam metal of the late 80s.
Yeah.
But it just didn't hit, didn't connect.
Yeah, it just didn't hit. It's sophomoric. Ugly Truth is quintessential early Cornell, which means it's intense and it's bluesy slow burn, but without much melodic inspiration. It just kind of plods. But again, much like the first couple of releases from Soundgarden, the best songs on it are from Kim Thayil. And you just mentioned them. Hands All Over, which rocks absolute balls. And then Get on the Snake, which again, ridiculous lyric, but it portends the kind of stuff that Thayil would be doing on the next 3 records in terms of some of the guitar, some of the lead guitar stuff and sort of the progginess of the riff. It was a sign of things to come. And then Cornell actually sounds like Cornell on this record.
Yeah.
That's the big improvement. Ultra Mega OK. It sounds like he was, I said in that episode, when we did that episode, it sounded like he was being recorded at the bottom of a 6-stair stairwell from the top.
Yeah.
And it was just awful. But here he gets to have the big booming voice, and it kind of like the Sex Master McGee, just really really great voice here. And so again, this all sets the stage for what became true greatness a couple years later.
Next, Mother Love Bone with their debut EP Shine. In 1988, 3 members of the defunct Green River, guitarist Stone Gossard and Bruce Fairweather and bassist Jeff Ament, got together with bassist singer Andrew Wood and drummer Regan Hagar, who came from Malfunction, another demised band. What they came up with was a swaggering glam rock take on grunge. Grungy glam, glammy grunge, whatever you want to call it. Wood dropped the bass and was pushed up front as the lead singer, allowing him to be the flamboyant, stage-dominating frontman he was destined to be. To be honest, I'm generally not a fan of this band. I actually think Malfunction was a purer distillation of Andy Wood's vision, and they just had better songs. However, this 4-track EP has one stellar song, Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns, 2 tracks that segue into each other. And this track shows Wood was at his best when he got in touch with his inner Elton John to deliver gorgeous, highly lyrical, epic power ballads. Chris?
Yeah, Mother Love Bone is a fascinating thing. So Wood died of a heroin overdose just before they finished Apple, which
we'll talk about the next episode in the series.
Yeah, which was going to be that was going to be their major label debut in 1990, and he died like a couple of days before they finished it, and so obviously it wasn't promoted, and it kind of got released without much fanfare. Had he lived, this band would have been big. They would have been a big band because they were essentially, like you said, grungy glam, but not really. They were more glam metal than anything else. And so was Alice in Chains when they first broke. Because you have to remember, in 1990, Alice in Chains became a staple of MTV's Total Request Live, which was that was the countdown of the 10 most requested songs. It became obviously was a huge deal for years on MTV. But Alice in Chains for months in 1990 and 91 became a staple of that countdown with the video for Man in the Box. And Mother Love Bone probably would have been either Crown of Thorns or Stardog Champion. One of those would have become a staple on MTV, and they would have been a big band. And I kind of think what might have ended up happening is they might have had the same arc as Alice in Chains. That once Nirvana and Soundgarden hit, it's like, oh, okay, grunge is okay, and so they segue into a darker, bluesier, spookier sound, and they got a lot less glammy. That might have happened with Mother Love Bone. Who knows? But yeah, Andrew Wood was charismatic as hell. Great singer, great frontman. And the weird thing about them is there's only a little touch of Green River and only a little touch of Seattle. Bigger influences on the CP on this, no joke, are Guns N' Roses and Jane's Addiction.
Yeah,
and this kind of this sort of max drama, max showiness that you would get from like Perry Farrell or Axl Rose. That, and I think Wood kind of embraced that kind of thing, and a little bit of Kiss too. And, and it's also strange, Gossard and Ament, they went on with Pearl Jam, where they came up with a much more sort of sincere, more songy. But here they're completely, they knew that Andrew Wood was a star, and along with Wood, they're writing to make him a star. And so it's a glam metal star vehicle for Andrew Wood. And so, who knows, again, it's one of those big what ifs, but Wood would have been a star. He would have been an MTV ready star, and they would have been on TRL, and they would have been huge.
Maybe.
Yeah,
we'll see.
I think so. Yep.
All right. Next, Screaming Trees with Buzz Factory.
Buzz Factory.
Huh?
It's Buzz Factory.
I thought it was Fuzz.
No, it's Buzz.
Buzz.
It's Buzz.
Ooh, okay.
It's Buzz Factory.
Okay. Really? All this time? Time, I thought it was Fuzz. What the hell?
Yeah. Okay. But it is indeed Buzz Factory.
Okay. All right. Buzz Factory. I stand corrected. Thank you, Chris. Buzz Factory. With this album, Screaming Trees started to fully assimilate the mid-1960s garage rock that was the core of their sound into something truly original and of their own. And that was a kind of grunge that was steeped in bluesiness and soulfulness. You can hear it in the anthemic Zeppelin-esque Black Sun Morning. You can hear it in the strident blues rock and the killer guitar riff of Too Far Away. You can hear it in the chiming, stately folk rock of Flower Web. You can hear it in the spacey, psychedelic jam of End of the Universe. While Mudhoney, Soundgarden, and Mother Love Bone were still figuring out how to have enough great songs for a whole LP or album, Screaming Trees had already beaten them to the punch. Chris?
Yeah, they beat them even before this. Invisible Lantern, I think, is a better album than this. If only because I'm not a fan of Indino's production on this record. Because there's times when there's just this weird mix where Gary Lee Connor's guitar kind of drowns out Lanigan, which, Lanigan should always be front and center, and he's not always front and center on this record. But really great stuff. Two best songs for me are Where the Twain Shall Meet at the front and End of the Universe in the back. Really great bookends here. And another fascinating thing about this record is, like I said, generally, I think it's a very strong record. But one thing about it is that you can kind of tell that Lanigan and Gary Lee Conner were like frenemies. There was a tension there where it's like, what are these two guys doing in the same band? And because a lot of times, and on this album, like, Conner comes up with this great riffage and this great wanking, on guitar and a lot of great wah-wah stuff. But Lanigan's melodies and performances run across the grain of those. They're not necessarily going with the melody of the songs. They're going counter to it. And so there ends up being this marvelous tension to the songs. And then, and there's a competitiveness here too, where I think Lanigan is trying to find the blues and the soul within all this garage psychedelic jamming, or, with Connor's psychedelic leanings. And then you've got Conner, who's like, oh, okay, well, you want to do soul? I'm gonna wacky it up by having all this like tremendous swirling electric guitar pyrotechnics.
Really, to me, that's what works. That juxtaposition
and it works.
Is what made him great.
That's not a criticism. The juxtaposition absolutely works, and it's what made this band so great. But over time they got more synergistic, and it wasn't quite as competitive. Like what we're going to talk about next is they calm down a little bit and they're more unified, and they release one of the most perfect EPs of all time.
Right. We'll talk. Yeah. For me, I still have Buzz Factory as Screaming Tree's best album. I still have it as their best record for me. Anyway,
Dust.
Dust is really good, but it's not as unique as this album is, I think. However, the EP that they did later in 1989 may be their finest recorded moment, and that is called Change Has Come. Toward the end of the year, Screaming Trees made the only record they would put out on Sub Pop, and it was this EP. The Trees were on a bit of a hot streak, and this EP captures them at their majestic best. The title track is a full-throttle basher that's given deep soulfulness by Mark Lanigan's bluesy growl. Flashes is the most rocked out the Trees had been up to this point, while Time Speaks Her Golden Tongue is not only one of the greatest song titles of all time, its beautiful mid-tempo psychedelic swirl recalls peak surrealistic pillow era Jefferson Airplane. The closing track, I've Seen You Before, leans in even more into droning psychedelia. They may not have gotten the hype that the other Seattle grunge bands were getting at the time, but in 1989, they were arguably the best band in the scene as far as recorded output went. Chris?
Well, at this point, they had been recording for several years. I think that is a fair, objective statement, that their recorded output at this point was the best. And again, this EP
until Nirvana's Bleach.
Well, yeah. I said up to this point. But the thing is, Change Has Come. I would rank Dust from 1996. I think is their masterpiece, and then I think Change Has Come would be right behind that. And then I like Invisible Lantern a little bit more than Buzz Factory. But Change Has Come is just perfect. It's a unified mood. I think Conner is a little bit more subdued and is more in service of the songs. Like you said, Time Speaks Her Golden Tongue. Psychedelic Swirl is a good way to describe that. I mean, that's just a beautiful hard rock psychedelic song and psychedelic ballad. And it's really meditative. Like Lanigan had that gift for that. And, I think by this point, Lanigan is one of the more influential people in the entire scene and in the entire story. I think it's pretty clear that Lanigan has an influence on Cornell as a vocalist and a writer.
Yeah.
Because you got to remember Cornell co-produced Uncle Anesthesia, which was their major label debut a couple of years later. And then he was buddies with Cobain. He has a profound influence on Cobain in terms
He
of,
introduced Cobain to Leadbelly, basically.
yeah, and just and sort of the Cobain's penchant for soulful singing and melody. A lot of that it was influenced by Lanigan, and it's come out just in the last, I think it was 5 years ago that it came out that Lanigan co-wrote Something in the Way from Nirvana's Nevermind. Which makes sense when you listen to it. It sounds like a Lanigan solo song.
Right.
So yeah, just really influential figure, and R.I.P. Mark Lanigan. I think he died like 4 years ago from complications along COVID, I think is what did him in. So, but yeah, tremendously influential person in this scene, and just tremendous songwriter. Like him and Connor, they just wrote great songs together routinely for years.
Yeah, they did. And another thing about Screaming Trees you may not know, their bass player, the guitarist and the bass player were brothers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gary Lee Connor and Van Connor. Van Connor was the guitarist, I believe, right?
He was
the bassist. Sorry,
Van was the bassist. Yeah,
Van was the bassist. He's dead. Gary Lee, the guitarist, is still alive. And what he does, he goes on YouTube and he plays solo acoustic versions of Screaming Trees songs, and he posts them.
Yeah,
So-
he has a bunch of he's pretty prolific, actually. Like his stuff doesn't necessarily sell, but I believe he lives in Austin, and he goes out and plays, but he has like about 10 side projects or 10 projects.
Yeah.
So he's constantly prolific, and him and you got to remember, what was it, 2019 or 2020? Lanigan wrote an autobiography where he absolutely trashed Gary Lee, and and it sounds like they made peace at the end, and but yeah, that must have been pretty contentious, and you got to admit, Lanigan was mercurial as hell, and he was a friggin' heroin addict for a few years, Dust is him cleaned up. One of the reasons that Sweet Oblivion kind of sucks is because Lanigan was strung out. It has the one great song, I Nearly Lost You, but the rest of it is.
There are a couple of other really good songs on there too. It's not just that one. We'll talk about that in the 1992 episode of this series.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You can tell we both love Screaming Trees.
On this episode, we dived into the year 1989 in our Saga of Grunge series. For the next episode, we're bringing our examining lens to the modern era and a different genre, hip-hop. This decade so far, and frankly a bit of the last decade as well, has seen an absolute decline in quality hip-hop releases. In fact, in 2025, Billboard reported that at one point there wasn't a single hip-hop song in the Hot 100 singles chart, something that would have seemed unfathomable at the beginning of the decade. However, one artist has held on to relevance and may be the only hip-hop figure for whom any new release can be deemed an event. Of course, this is Kendrick Lamar. The Los Angeles-based legend has an incredible body of work that blew open the parameters of what hip-hop could be, stylistically, artistically, and even poetically. A creator of artful, even progressive hip-hop that still manages to connect to a mass mainstream audience, Lamar deserves further examination, especially in a time when there are so few, if any, like him left. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you Kendrick Lamar, hip-hop's last genius standing. God's balls!
Yeah!
More than just possessing one of the greatest and funniest album titles of all time, God's Balls by the band Tad demonstrates how unique Tad was in the Seattle grunge scene. They were arguably the most relentlessly heavy band, and they managed to capture the grind and churning intensity of industrial metal without the electronics. Like with Mudhoney and Soundgarden, they would go on to make better records than this up and down effort, but the ups are ball-crushingly awesome, with tracks such as Sex God Missy, Boiler Room, and Nipple Belt. Chris?
Yeah, awesome. Satan's Chainsaw. Cyanide Bath. Yeah. Tad was just like a living cartoon character. He's kind of like the mascot of grunge.
Tad Doyle, yeah.
Yeah, Tad Doyle. He's like 6'4", 300 plus pounds, long hair. He was a champion flannel wearer. He was always stoned off his nut. And he just this huge jovial stoner dude that just wanted to rock the fuck out. And what you have here is flat out stoner rock. It's somewhere, and it's clever. It has its musical merits because it's somewhere in between the dark metal of Soundgarden, the ironic punk of Mudhoney, and the sludge rock of the Melvins.
Yeah.
Really heavy and shticky. And so, you can tell they're just having a lot of fun, and they're just and they're just goofing off. And this is not a serious album. I mean, come on, God's balls.
That should have been the name of the band.
Yeah, that is easily one of the best album titles of all time. And it's right up there with Big Black's songs about fucking.
I mean, the follow-up album should have been Satan's Ass.
Hey, they did have Satan's Chainsaw. So yes, they had their place, and Tad, he was like buddies with everybody in Seattle.
Yeah.
He was buddies with Lanigan, he was buddies with Cobain, he was buddies with most of them. He was just kind of like one of those, universally beloved people in the scene. And so you can't tell the story of grunge without talking about Tad and the influence and the showmanship that he had.
Sure.
He's kind of like the flip side of Andy Wood. Andy Wood is the charisma. He's like the classic charisma, and then Tad is these fat stoner charisma.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Next, the Jesus Lizard with their debut EP, Pure. Now we're in the grunge adjacency section of this album and EP countdown. Scratch Acid, one of Kurt Cobain's favorite bands, were a post-hardcore band from Austin, Texas, that were one of the pioneers of noise rock in the U.S. indie alternative underground in the mid-1980s, with their 1984 self-titled EP being their most important work. After they broke up in 1987, lead singer David Yao and bassist David Sims formed a new band with guitarist Dwayne Dennison and drummer Mac McNeely, called themselves the Jesus Lizard, and they promptly moved their base of operations to Chicago, where they started working with producer Steve Albini and signed with the indie record label Touch and Go Records. What the Jesus Lizard produced was a stripped down, more focused, more menacing sound than Scratch Acid, with even more demented lyrics that explored the terrain of mental illness and psychoses. With Yao as frontman, you couldn't even call him a singer per se. He was more like an unhinged preacher speaking in tongues. This brief 5-song debut EP is a good introduction to their skewered, aggressive, heavy take on angular post-punk rock. Chris?
Yeah, not a huge fan, although I do acknowledge their importance to the development of heavy rock in America. Basically, it's artsy-fartsy noise rock. It's loud and intense, but it's not melodic in the least.
No, they're not, and it's not supposed to. They're a huge influence on Mets.
Exactly, and that kind of noise rock tradition. But they're really good at being spasmodic and rough, and they did offer up some really nasty guitar stuff. Tough band to love because it was so challenging. But hooking up with Albini, they were a good band for Albini. Because Albini was, he specialized in stripped down noise, which is kind of what they did. And the amazing thing about this record, and I didn't realize this until I read the Wikipedia entry, is that the drums on this album is all drum machine.
Yeah, electronic.
Yeah, they didn't have a drummer at this point, and so they're using drum programming here, but it's so well done. And and so in tune with the rest of the noisiness and the rest of the dissonance that it works. It really, really works. So this album sounds great, and it's a living testament to the awesomeness of Albini as a sound engineer. But not my bag, not my bag at all. it's one of those things. I admire the Jesus Lizard, don't much like him.
Well, we're going to hear a little bit more from them in the 1991 and 1992 episodes.
Oh, I'm sure we are. Yep.
The albums they put out in those years are considered their best. But anyway, the next band, probably the ultimate grunge-adjacent band, the Pixies with Doolittle. Like all the grunge-adjacent bands we've talked about in this series, the Pixies from Boston were very much so in how they shared a sensibility, an attitude, and even a heavy punk-inflected sound with what was going on in Seattle at the time, not to mention the enormous influence they had on Nirvana and a whole slew of other bands. The previous year's album, Surfer Rosa, made them darlings of American college radio, and with Doolittle, they became arguably the biggest college radio band in the country, what with REM having graduated to a major label and scoring platinum albums and hit singles by the end of the 1980s. On Doolittle, the band trades in Steve Albini's dry yet thick, heavy and ominous sound for spaciousness and more clarity. The songs are catchier and, dare I say, poppier than anything they had done before, as evident by the jaunty surf pop of Here Comes Your Man and La La Love You, as well as the melodic pop rock of Monkey Gone to Heaven. Don't worry, though, their patented abrasive amalgam of punk, thrash metal, and demented surf rock is still very much present in bangers such as Debaser, Tame, Crackety Jones, and Dead. This is absolutely peak Pixies, their second straight masterpiece, and the album that solidified their standing as one of the greatest and most important and influential American bands of the 1980s. Chris?
Yeah, great album. Tremendous production job. Albini's production of Surfer Rosa is more important and more famous because of how stark the contrast, how stark he made the soft loud, and how wild it is there. But here, they worked with a guy named Gil Norton who added layers, literally, like he double layered the guitars, he added in some reverb and did then did a lot of stuff. But so it's a lot richer in terms of its sound. Even when they get into the soft loud, it's more soothing, like literally it's easy listening Pixies, basically, and still with some of those strange quirks. Debaser's probably my favorite Pixies song. Un Chen and Deluge. Yeah. Just great stuff. And, just really great drinking song. Really great to shout when you got a few beers in you. So great. And like you said, poppier and cleaner overall, and more accessible. Here Comes Your Man is another great, obviously all time great single from the era. So I said Black Francis was a genius. He was a real genius, and he just his songwriting, his voice, and some of the quirks he had as a lyricist, and he the way that he could make dark so accessible.
Yeah.
And the way that he could play with those soft, loud dynamics to really create a mood and a vibe was pretty extraordinary. Cobain went on record saying that basically when he went in to do Nevermind, he basically was doing his best to rip off Doolittle.
Yeah. And he probably arguably did a better job.
Well,
but we're not there yet. Because speaking of Nirvana, we're going to end this countdown with their debut album, Bleach. Considering how iconic of a band Nirvana became, it might be startling for younger generation fans to know that in the late 1980s, Nirvana formed in 1987, the band were seen as the runt of the litter of bands in the Seattle scene. They were the junior band that opened for everyone else. Mudhoney and Soundgarden, and to an extent Mother Love Bone, were the bands who were earmarked for commercial success. But even from the very beginning, there was something special about this band that those in the know knew about. In late 1988, they released their first single on Sub Pop, a corrosive pop grunge cover of the 1960s Dutch band Shocking Blues' Love Buzz, which has some of Kurt Cobain's most piercing, howling guitar work, which is saying something, considering what he would later go on to do. While Everett True wrote the first expose of the Seattle music scene, as we spoke of earlier, it was actually John Robb of the British music weekly Sounds who actually made the very first mention of Nirvana in the UK music press when he named it Single of the Week shortly after it came out in the magazine Sounds. When Nirvana went into Reciprocal Recording Studio in Seattle to make the album with Jack and Dino, it took a total of 30 hours and $600. The record was ready to be released in early 1989, but Sub Pop head honcho Bruce Pavitt requested that the album be resequenced. Being nearly perpetually broke at the time, Pavitt and Bruce Poneman delayed the album even further so they could secure enough funding to properly release and promote it. It finally came out in June of '89, and while it sold decently for an independent record, and especially so for a Sub Pop release, the sales weren't anything special. However, critical buzz in the underground music press was something bordering on rapturous. Of course, True's legendary Melody Maker article on the Seattle grunge scene prepared British indie music fans and critics for Bleach and its positive reception abroad. But the US music press also latched onto it, especially a rave review by Robert Christgau when he was working for The New Yorker at the time. Overall, Bleach shows off the more heavy metal side of Cobain's artistry, which makes sense considering that Nirvana were touring a lot with the Melvins and Tad at the time. Love Buzz is on this record, but so are towering sludge feasts such as Negative Creep, Floyd the Barber, School, and Big Cheese. Cobain's love of the Beatles is shown early on with the gloriously gorgeous About a Girl, a song supposedly written after Cobain spent an entire afternoon repeatedly listening to the 1964 US release of the album Meet the Beatles. Revisiting all these early grunge bands and records as we have for this podcast and for this series that we're doing, one of the things that really stands out is Nirvana's, and frankly Cobain's, genius for melding melodic beauty and pop hooks to the most badass, aggressive, nad-pumping, filthy rock and roll that can't be easily classified as punk nor metal. And then there are his lyrics, which can veer from weird yet vivid impressionistic imagery that still manages to convey what the song is about to emotional, heart-wrenching descriptions of troubled relationships, such as those on About a Girl and Swap Meet. The latter, where Cobain observes a poor, young, artsy couple doomed to break up, with the heartbreaking line, "She loves him more than he will ever know. He loves her more than he will ever show." By combining dirty, heavy, cutting-edge, subterranean rock and roll with the sensibility and intelligence of traditional songcraft, Nirvana created what is arguably the greatest and most definitive grunge album of the 1980s. And we're still 2 years away from Nevermind. Chris?
Yeah, this might be the most pure grunge album ever released. Because, obviously for them, it's their punkiest album, it's their roughest album, and their sludgiest album. And what you see here is there's an evolution that's going on. I think that in the beginning, I think you basically mentioned it, they were more influenced by the Melvins and Tad than they were by anything poppy or, sort of anything indie rock at the time. And it kind of shows, like Paper Cuts is an early song. Floyd the Barber's an early song. There's like 2 or 3 songs on this that they recorded before they went into the studio with Endino. And they intended to, and I think they did it with a different drummer too, that they intended to re-record it, but then they decided, why fix it if it ain't broke? And so some of that stuff is the early stuff. But then you see an evolution in here where you get some genuinely exciting stuff that portends Nevermind. School is amazing. Scoff is amazing. Swap Meet, as you mentioned, all 3 of those songs. And I love Sifting too, because Sifting kind of combines all of these things where it gets that sludginess and that sort of hypnotic heaviness and almost like Sabbathy heaviness with this gorgeous chorus melody. That comes off, and then the best vocal performance on the album, I think, is on Sifting as well. And so, so in a way, it's a fascinatingly uneven album, but it works. It's just one of those things that works because that's why I'm saying I think it's quintessentially grunge. And, and Cobain had said in interviews that he intentionally did it in a grunge style because he figured that's what Sub Pop wanted. Sub Pop wants to sell grunge. I'll give him grunge. So he's not necessarily at his freest as a songwriter. I think he goes for, like obviously he has About a Girl, which is kind of like, okay, no, this is the one instance where I get to do what I want to do. And maybe you can say that about Negative Creep too. But the rest of it I think is kind of done, with Sub Pop's patronage in mind. I think once he gets to the majors and once he gets in there with Butch Vig, then I think he feels a lot freer to just kind of do his thing and to find, that sort of that perfect songcraft that he was able to find. But here, again, seeing the evolution from the beginning of it with Blue and Floyd the Barber to the end with Sifting is just extraordinary. And there were 2 songs that were tacked on when they reissued it, but Sifting was the original end of the record, and ending it on that note, just an incredible journey of an album. And so, it deserves all the props that it gets. Yeah. And actually, it's what keeps Dino in money.
Yeah.
Dino is never, he still runs the same operation. He still records, local, under the radar, local bands mostly. But, he still gets decent checks from his Nirvana work.
Yeah.
Yeah. God bless Jack.
Yeah. All right. So we reached the end of the 1989 installment, segment, stop, if you will, on the Saga of Grunge series. So the 1990s is coming soon. And then, the great seismic shift we're a couple of years away from that.
Yeah, we'll certainly be ready to capture the wins and keep telling the story, which gets ever more fascinating. I think we're pretty much set up for blast off from here. With that, as we always do at the end of these episodes, folks, we encourage you to join our fabulous Curmudgeonly community on Facebook. Good stuff up there, and we get engagement. And, we share a lot of cool stuff from YouTube in anticipation of these episodes. So, check us out. Go to facebook.com/group/curmudgeonrock. It's invite only, but, we'll let you in. The more the merrier. Have anything to say about this episode? Are you repulsed by God's balls? Let us know. Or have you heard Los Thuthanaka and have a much different opinion than Art and I? Let us know. Again, that's curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And then finally, look out for our special Spotify playlist that'll capture a lot of the music that we talked about in this episode. You'll be able to find that in the episode description that accompanies our here podcast on any of the platforms that you use, Apple, Stitcher, Amazon, wherever else you get your podcasts as well. Check that out. And you'll have a soundtrack. And hey, man, dig it.